Have you ever walked into a room, shared an idea that made perfect sense to you? Something profound, something that could shift the way people saw the world, and instead of admiration, you were met with uncomfortable silence? A few forced smiles, a quickly changed topic, or worse, passive dismissal. Maybe you've always sensed it. In school, in the workplace, in casual conversations. That quiet, unspoken tension when you begin to speak about the things that truly matter to you. The topics that keep you awake at night. Questions about meaning, suffering, power, and existence itself. You notice how others squirm, how they subtly distance themselves from you, as if your very presence challenges the foundations of their comfortably crafted illusions. And in those moments, a troubling question might have flickered in the back of your mind. Is there something wrong with me? Am I too much? Too intense? Too different? But what if the problem isn't you? What if it's them, or rather, the nature of society itself? What if society, in its relentless desire for order, conformity, and predictability, inherently punishes those who think too deeply, who see too clearly, and who refuse to look away from the uncomfortable truths that others spend their lives avoiding? This isn't a new dilemma. In fact, one of the sharpest minds to ever dissect this dynamic was Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher both adored and feared for his relentless honesty about human nature. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence, especially the kind that veers into philosophical, artistic, or existential realms, is not merely ignored by society. It is actively suppressed, ridiculed, and punished. Why? Because it threatens the equilibrium. Most people, Schopenhauer argued, live within a carefully maintained illusion, a social performance built around survival, trivial pleasures, and shallow distractions. And those who pierce this illusion, who reveal the absurdity of blind ambition, the inevitability of suffering, and the fragile, temporary nature of all human endeavors, become an existential threat to this social order. And so, society marginalizes them, not always with open hostility, but through subtle forms of exclusion, through ridicule masked as humor, through labels like arrogant, aloof, or too sensitive, through professional roadblocks, through social isolation, through that quiet but suffocating message: be less, think less, feel less, blend in, or be left behind. In today's video, we're going to dissect this unsettling phenomenon. We'll explore why, throughout history and even in our modern lives, society has punished the intelligent, not necessarily those with high IQ scores or academic accolades, but those with depth, those who refuse to distract themselves from the fundamental questions of existence, those who see through the collective delusions. We'll begin by examining Schopenhauer's philosophical framework on human nature, society, and suffering. We'll see how intelligence, by its very nature, isolates the individual and creates friction with the herd mentality. We'll then dive into real-life examples, from misunderstood artists and philosophers to the quiet outcasts in your workplace or neighborhood. As we progress, we'll build tension by revealing just how deeply embedded this dynamic is in the fabric of human society, how it manifests in ways you've likely experienced without fully realizing it, how even those closest to you might unconsciously be complicit in this subtle punishment. And at the heart of it all lies one of the darkest, yet liberating truths Schopenhauer ever uncovered: that intelligence, particularly the kind aimed at truth, is both a curse and a gift. It alienates you from the crowd but grants you access to a clearer, deeper understanding of existence. But here's the twist, and this is crucial. While society may fear and punish the intelligent, it also desperately needs them. For it is these outsiders, these restless questioners, these inconvenient voices that ultimately drive culture forward, challenge unjust systems, and remind us of our humanity. So tonight, as you listen to this video, I want you to ask yourself, have you felt this tension? Have you experienced the quiet punishments of intelligence? And what would your life look like if you fully embraced this role, not as a victim of society's discomfort, but as a necessary disruptor of its illusions? Let's find out. Would you like me to continue with the exploration of core concept, deep dive, approximate 2,500 words? Next? You said, yes, ChatGPT said. Excellent. Let's move straight into the exploration of the core concept section now. This will be a deep, dramatic, and thought-provoking dive into Schopenhauer's philosophy on why society fears and punishes the intelligent. It will weave together his key concepts, real-life parallels, and timeless psychological truths, all in that suspenseful, reflective tone you requested. Here's the next 2,500 words. Exploration of core concept, deep dive approximate. 2,500 words. To understand why society punishes the intelligent, we must first understand what Arthur Schopenhauer meant when he spoke of human nature. Schopenhauer wasn't interested in the polite facades we wear in public. He sought to unearth the raw, unfiltered reality of existence, and what he found was not comforting. At the heart of Schopenhauer's philosophy lies a single, unsettling proposition: that human beings are driven by a blind, irrational force he called the will. This will is not your conscious desires or preferences. It is the primal, instinctive urge for survival, reproduction, and dominance. It is the same impulse that drives a predator to chase its prey, a plant to reach toward sunlight, or a human being to seek power, pleasure, and security, often at the expense of others. And here's where it becomes important to our question. According to Schopenhauer, most people live their entire lives in service of this will without ever becoming aware of it. Their ambitions, rivalries, loves, and hatreds, all are manifestations of this blind, ceaseless striving. And to keep this striving bearable, society constructs a collective illusion, a web of customs, beliefs, and diversions that distract individuals from the painful, often meaningless nature of their existence. It is, in many ways, a form of mass hypnosis. Now, intelligence, especially of the reflective, philosophical kind, poses a direct threat to this system. Because to be truly intelligent is not merely to possess information or problem-solving skills. It is to see through appearances, to ask why when others are content with how, to recognize the inherent suffering and absurdity baked into the human condition. And here lies the core tragedy Schopenhauer reveals. The more intelligent a person is, the more alienated they become from the social world. The more acutely they perceive the hypocrisy, vanity, and shallowness of human affairs. And the less they can participate in the mindless rituals that others find comforting. This is why Schopenhauer argued, deep intelligence is often accompanied by melancholy. The intelligent man is not merely burdened by his own sorrows but by the unbearable weight of seeing too much, of recognizing the hollowness in conversations, the emptiness in achievements, the cyclical nature of human folly. And as history has shown, those who see too clearly become dangerous. Think of Socrates, condemned to death for corrupting the youth, when in truth, he merely taught them to question the myths of their elders. Think of Giordano Bruno, burned alive for suggesting that the universe might be infinite and that other worlds might harbor life. Or Nietzsche, driven to madness after a lifetime of dismantling the comforting illusions of religion, morality, and modernity. Even in more subtle, contemporary forms, this punishment persists. Consider the corporate employee who points out the futility of endless productivity metrics, only to be labeled a troublemaker. The artist who dares to depict the darker aspects of human nature, dismissed as morbid or depressing. The child who asks difficult, existential questions in school, quietly redirected toward more appropriate topics. It's not always violence or exile. Often, the punishment is silence, isolation, social rejection, the sense of being perpetually out of sync with the world around you. Schopenhauer would say this is inevitable because the masses, driven by the will, instinctively reject anything that disrupts their illusions. The intelligent person does not merely threaten their beliefs but forces them to confront uncomfortable truths about their own lives. And most people, Schopenhauer argued, would rather remain comfortably deceived than face those truths. This is where Schopenhauer introduces a critical distinction between the man of the will and the man of the intellect. The man of the will is driven by ambition, appetite, and ego. He seeks wealth, status, and sensory pleasure. His life is a perpetual chase, never satisfied, always reaching for the next object of desire. He thrives in society because society is built by and for his kind. The man of the intellect, on the other hand, is driven by contemplation, detachment, and a search for meaning beyond the superficial. He often finds himself at odds with society because he no longer believes in its promises. Where others see success, he sees futility. Where others see meaning, he sees invention. And where others find comfort in belonging, he finds suffocation. Schopenhauer believed that these two types cannot truly coexist. The more a man becomes aligned with intellect, the more alienated he becomes from the will-driven world. This is not arrogance, it's a painful awakening. And yet, intelligence continues to appear within every generation precisely because it serves a vital function. It forces humanity to evolve, however slowly. Even as society punishes its thinkers, it eventually absorbs their ideas, often without credit. The very concepts that once got men killed, the earth revolving around the sun, the equality of races, the absurdity of endless war, become accepted truths only after being baptized in the blood of those who first spoke them. Schopenhauer likened the intelligent man to a solitary observer standing atop a mountain watching the chaotic dance of human affairs below. From this vantage point, the noise of petty rivalries and hollow ambitions fades, replaced by a tragic but beautiful clarity. The observer recognizes both the cruelty and the poetry of existence. He sees that much of what men fight and die for is mere illusion. And though this awareness brings loneliness, it also grants freedom. But what does this look like in everyday life? It looks like the introvert who avoids shallow gatherings not out of arrogance, but because the conversations drain him. It's the artist who spends months wrestling with a single idea because mediocrity feels like betrayal. It's the thinker who, despite knowing the social cost, speaks the uncomfortable truth at a family dinner. It's the teenager reading philosophy books in secret, sensing that his questions unsettle his teachers. It's the employee who refuses to participate in performative company loyalty, choosing instead to quietly pursue his own inner life. These people are punished not through legal means, but through exclusion, through the vague sense that they don't quite belong. That something about them is unsettling. And this punishment, Schopenhauer warns, can wear the intelligent person down. It can drive him toward bitterness, misanthropy, or despair. And yet, it can also become a source of strength. For while society fears the intelligent, it also needs them. It is these outsiders who question the status quo, who anticipate crises before they arrive, who see patterns others miss. The artist who warns of impending war before the first shots are fired. The philosopher who detects the rot beneath popular ideologies. The scientist who, ridiculed in his time, lays the groundwork for future generations. Schopenhauer's own life was a testament to this paradox. Ridiculed by his contemporaries, overshadowed by Hegel, dismissed as pessimistic, and yet, in time, his writings outlived them all. His insights influenced Nietzsche, Freud, Wittgenstein, and countless others. His once feared pessimism became the foundation for modern existential thought. And this is perhaps the final, unsettling truth Schopenhauer offers us, that intelligence, properly understood, is a burden. It isolates. It unsettles. It invites punishment. But it is also the only force capable of redeeming humanity from its worst instincts. It will not make you happy in the conventional sense. It will not guarantee success or admiration. But it will grant you a clearer, deeper relationship with existence itself. And for those rare souls capable of bearing it, this is a reward far greater than any society could bestow. In the next section, we'll push even deeper. We'll explore the subtle, insidious ways this punishment manifests in modern life, in corporate culture, in friendships, in families, and most importantly, in the private dialogue you have with yourself. Because the greatest punishment society inflicts on the intelligent is not public scorn, but the internalized voice that whispers, "Be less." Hide this part of you. Don't make them uncomfortable. And it's time we dismantled that voice. You might think that in our modern, progressive societies, with their universities, think tanks, and intellectual prizes, intelligence would finally be celebrated. That perhaps we've evolved past the days when philosophers were executed for speaking too boldly or artists starved in obscurity for daring to paint the world as it truly was. But here's the unsettling revelation. While the punishments have grown more sophisticated, they remain just as effective. The guillotine has been replaced with silence, the pyre with career stagnation. Exile has taken the form of social exclusion, a quiet, nearly invisible distancing that leaves no obvious scars but slowly suffocates the soul. And what's most chilling is that this punishment often comes not from faceless institutions or tyrannical regimes, but from the people closest to us. Friends, colleagues, family. Have you ever noticed how people react when you express a thought that deviates too far from the comfortable scripts they've been conditioned to follow? You share a theory about human nature, about the futility of certain social rituals, or the hidden brutality behind a celebrated tradition, and suddenly the room shifts. Laughter grows nervous. Eyes avoid yours. The conversation quickly steers back to safer ground. It's not overt hostility. It's something subtler. A flicker of discomfort. An unspoken agreement to pretend your observation was either a joke, a phase, or a flaw. Why? Because deep down your words threaten to unravel the carefully constructed illusions that people cling to. Schopenhauer believed that most human beings prefer a predictable, if flawed, reality over an honest, uncomfortable one. They arranged their lives like a stage play, each person assigned a role, each conversation following a script. And anyone who refuses to stick to their assigned lines becomes a liability. This is especially true in institutions built on hierarchy, workplaces, religious communities, even families. In these environments, the maintenance of order depends on shared fictions. The fiction that the boss is competent, that the system is fair, that hard work always pays off, that everyone is, in their own way, good. The intelligent person, with their habit of asking why do we follow this rule? Why does this matter? Why do we pretend this is normal? Threatens to expose the absurdity of these beliefs. And so, they must be contained. In the workplace, this often takes the form of subtle exclusion. The thinker is praised for their creativity but passed over for promotions. Invited to meetings but their suggestions are politely ignored. Given projects but quietly sidelined when decisions are made. Their very presence makes others uneasy because it reminds them of the compromises they've made to survive. Among friends, it's the subtle shift in tone. The half-joking accusations of being a buzzkill, a cynic, or a downer. The invitations that stop coming. The sense that while you're welcome in their company, your real self, the part of you that asks the big, unsettling questions, is not. In families, it's often even more painful. The pressure to conform to inherited beliefs. The quiet expectation that you won't embarrass them by deviating too far from tradition. The half-loving, half-condescending remarks, you think too much. Why can't you just be normal? Stop overcomplicating things. And here's the most insidious part. Over time, this external punishment seeps inward. The intelligent person begins to police themselves, to soften their language, to hold back observations, to pretend they care about things they don't, to feign enthusiasm for rituals that feel hollow. They learn, consciously or not, that survival requires a performance. Schopenhauer described this as a kind of spiritual claustrophobia, the sense of being trapped in a world where meaningful conversation is forbidden, where authenticity is punished, and where one's deepest thoughts must be smuggled into solitude. And modern life, with its culture of constant distraction, amplifies this. The rise of social media, reality television, and superficial celebrity culture isn't accidental. It serves a function to keep people occupied with trivialities so they never pause long enough to confront the emptiness beneath. In a world addicted to shallow pleasures and instant gratification, the intelligent person becomes a kind of ghost, present but invisible. They speak, but their words are lost in a sea of noise. They try to connect, but find most conversations devoid of substance. They see patterns others miss, but lack the means to act on them. And if they persist, if they refuse to mute themselves, the punishments escalate. At first, it's discomfort. Then exclusion. Then accusations. Arrogance. Elitism. Negativity. It's the age-old tactic of discrediting the messenger to avoid confronting the message. History is littered with examples. Nikola Tesla, who dreamed of free energy for all, died alone in a hotel room. Alan Turing, who helped end World War II, was chemically castrated for his sexuality. Van Gogh, whose art now sells for millions, died by his own hand, having sold only one painting in his lifetime. Even today, whistleblowers, thinkers, and innovators face exile, not always physically, but socially and professionally. The systems they challenge are designed not to argue with them, but to erase them. And yet, Schopenhauer would argue there's a strange, bittersweet dignity in this exile. Because while the masses are slaves to the will, to status, appetite, and distraction, the intelligent person, in their solitude, has access to something rare, an unfiltered view of reality. It may be harsh, it may be lonely, but it is honest. And in that honesty lies the seed of genuine freedom. But what makes this all the more tragic is how often the intelligent person turns this punishment against themselves. Internalizing society's rejection, they begin to doubt their own worth. They wonder if their sensitivity is weakness, if their solitude is failure, if their clarity is madness. This is the deepest cut of all. Because once intelligence begins to mistrust itself, society no longer needs to silence the thinker, they'll do it themselves. And so the cycle continues. The world remains dominated by the man of the will while the man of the intellect walks alone. Each generation producing a handful of voices that speak the truth too soon, too boldly, too clearly, and are punished accordingly. Yet Schopenhauer believed this exile, while painful, could also be transformed. Not into bitterness, but into a kind of sacred detachment. A way of living apart from the illusions, without hatred for those who remain trapped within them. For to hate the masses, he warned, is merely another form of enslavement. The intelligent man must learn to pity them. To understand that their hostility springs from fear, a fear of what they might see if they removed their masks, if they stepped outside the comforting haze of distraction. And in this understanding lies the possibility of peace. In the next section, we'll arrive at the turning point of this journey, the revelation Schopenhauer offered as both a warning and a gift. The idea that true freedom, true clarity requires the acceptance of solitude. That to see the world clearly is to risk being cast out from it, but that this exile, embraced rather than resisted, can become a source of incomparable strength. Because while society punishes the intelligent, it cannot imprison their minds. And for those willing to bear the burden of their own lucidity, there awaits a kind of liberation no crowd can offer. And here it is, the truth most people will spend their entire lives avoiding. Schopenhauer believed that the greatest tragedy is not that society punishes the intelligent. It's that the intelligent person, in their craving to belong, in their desperate hope to be understood, spends years contorting themselves to fit into a world that was never built for them. They soften their voice, numb their questions, smile when they want to weep, laugh at jokes that feel empty, surround themselves with noise, with trivialities, with people who do not, and perhaps cannot, understand the weight they carry, all for the illusion of belonging. But the revelation Schopenhauer offers is both devastating and liberating. There is no place for you in the crowd. Not because you were broken, not because you were flawed, but because the very nature of society demands conformity, and your mind, your questions, your refusal to accept illusions, these are an existential threat to its fragile order. And so the intelligent person faces a choice, one that defines the arc of their life. They can continue to seek approval, sacrificing their authenticity for scraps of shallow acceptance. Dimming their brilliance, diluting their thoughts, pretending to be something smaller, softer, safer. Or they can embrace their exile. Schopenhauer argued that true freedom begins the moment you stop trying to belong to a world that punishes what you are. When you realize that solitude is not a curse, but a sanctuary. That your clarity is not madness, but a rare, unpurchasable gift. This is the moment of transformation. When the intelligent person ceases to be a victim of society's discomfort and becomes a sovereign observer. No longer expecting understanding, no longer begging for permission to exist as they are. Accepting with a quiet, almost holy resignation that most people will never meet them where they stand, and that this is not a failure, but a necessary condition of their clarity. And in this solitude, something extraordinary happens. The punishment loses its sting. The exile ceases to feel like a sentence. The intelligent person no longer seeks to be loved by the world, but to understand it. No longer desperate to be heard by the deaf, but content to speak for the sake of truth itself. Because in the end, Schopenhauer reminds us, the highest form of strength is not to lead the crowd, nor to be accepted by it, but to walk alone and remain unbroken. And it's in this sacred solitude, this chosen exile, that the intelligent person finds a peace no applause could ever match. So where does this leave you? If you've listened this far, chances are you felt it. The quiet punishments. The isolation disguised as indifference. The unspoken pressure to be less, to think less, to want less. Perhaps you've spent years wondering why you always seemed slightly out of place, why certain conversations exhausted you, why others looked at you with a mixture of admiration and unease. Schopenhauer would tell you it's not a flaw. It's not a defect. It's the inevitable consequence of seeing the world too clearly in a world that survives by looking away. And while the truth of this can be heavy, it also carries with it a strange, unexpected form of grace. Because once you stop expecting the world to celebrate what it cannot comprehend, a new kind of freedom takes shape. The freedom to stop explaining yourself. The freedom to stop diluting your thoughts to fit into rooms too small for them. The freedom to choose depth over popularity, meaning over approval. You begin to realize that your solitude is not a symptom of failure, but a condition of clarity. And this doesn't mean you must live a life of bitterness or retreat into cynical disdain for the world. That too would be a form of enslavement, a reaction to the very system you claim to have transcended. Schopenhauer urged the intelligent to move beyond resentment, to pity the masses, not hate them, to understand that their hostility, their discomfort is born not of malice but of fear. Fear of what they might find if they paused long enough to reflect. Fear of the weight of their own unasked questions. And so, the task is not to change them. It's to master yourself, to cultivate a kind of interior strength, to find solace in philosophy, in art, in nature, in the quiet company of other rare minds, whether living or long dead. To build a private sanctuary where your thoughts can roam without censorship, where your questions are not liabilities but lifelines. This, Schopenhauer believed, is the path to genuine peace. Not the peace of applause or acceptance, but the peace of integrity. Of knowing you did not betray yourself to belong. Of knowing that your solitude, however heavy, was earned in the service of truth. And practically, what does this mean for you? It means accepting that some conversations will always feel empty and choosing not to blame yourself for it. It means seeking out spaces, physical or intellectual, where depth is not punished but nurtured. Books that challenge you. Music that unsettles you. People, however few, who don't flinch at the darker, stranger corners of your mind. It means learning to be your own witness. To measure your worth not by the warmth of the crowd, but by the fidelity of your own reflection. And perhaps most importantly, it means recognizing that while society may punish the intelligent, it also desperately needs them. For every age, however resistant, eventually turns to its outcasts in times of crisis. When the illusions shatter, when the old myths collapse, when the noise falls silent and the questions can no longer be ignored, it is then that the voices once dismissed as too dark, too difficult, too inconvenient become the ones that light the way forward. And so I'll leave you with this. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to belong to a world that isn't built for you? If you embraced your solitude not as a sentence, but as a sanctuary? If you carried your clarity not as a curse, but as a rare inheritance passed down through the centuries by the thinkers and questioners who refused to look away? How much lighter might you feel if you finally stopped apologizing for the weight you carry? Let that question linger. And if this resonated with you, if you felt these tensions, these punishments, this exile, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. You are not as alone as you might feel. There are others, scattered and unseen, carrying the same burden. And perhaps, in speaking, you'll remind someone else that their solitude, too, is a mark of lucidity. If you found value in this exploration, consider subscribing for more reflections like this. Together, we can carve out a quiet refuge for those unwilling to live asleep. Until next time, stay sharp, stay strange, and most of all, stay sovereign.